What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Voglu, and as always, we're brought to you by Scott Vicknair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Vicknair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. That's right, a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So on this Monday edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, we're brought to you live here on Boo Crew Media's YouTube page. I want to go with some kind of, I'd say, projection topics. And what I mean by that is I want to look not towards week one, not towards week two, look towards the grand picture of the Saints, the good and the bad. Can the Saints win the NFC? We're going to talk about that later in the show. What is the biggest flaw for the Saints? We're going to talk about that right now. And on the flip side of things, let's not talk about flaws. Let's talk about exciting ideas. Can the Saints make a big trade that shakes things up in the NFC? So we're going to talk about that all right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, as we are roughly 18 days away from training camp, give or take, which is exciting as all hell in my opinion, because that means we'll get some really, really fun stuff. We'll get to see some position battles in camp. We'll get to hear more about our favorite players and what they're doing in New Orleans. So I'm excited about that. But until then, guys, let's get into what I just mentioned before. The biggest concern for the Saints. What's the weakest point on this roster? What's the flaw? And I think for some people, it will be the health of the wide receiver room, right? Olave a little banged up, Shaheed a little banged up. Obviously, Michael Thomas has been dealing with injuries the last couple of years. Some people might go with the linebacker depth outside of Demario Davis and Pete Werner. Maybe you don't like what they have out there, and I cannot blame you if that's how you feel. For me, though, personally, if I'm going to pick the biggest flaw for the Saints, the spot where I'm a little nervous about this team, I'm actually going to go with the offensive line. And the reason I'm going to go with the offensive line is because I sit here today on this Monday, July 10th, and I tell you, honestly, this is just how I feel. There are 3/5 of the starters that I don't feel comfortable about. So 3 out of 5, not great. And part of it is injury related, right? I'm worried about Ruiz coming off a foot injury. I'm worried about Penning coming off of 2 foot injuries. I'm worried about Pete always being hurt. So those are injury factors. But those 3 guys that I mentioned, I think it's not just about injuries. There's other concerns that you can boil into this entire thing. Let me start. Let's go with Penning. Besides him being hurt, what is Trevor Penning? I know he's a first-round pick. I know he's a Northern Iowa product. But outside of those 2 things, there's nothing concrete I can tell you because we haven't seen anything from Trevor Penning. And I hope that the changes, I hope he comes out and plays extremely well, whether it's in camp, preseason, regular season, all the 3. I'd love to see it. But he is now through 2 injuries in his NFL career, and he hasn't played a lot. So I have question marks about Trevor Penning, who is supposed to be your week 1 starting left tackle. So when you don't know what you're getting from your left tackle, that's a little scary to me, especially when you have a quarterback like Derek Carr. And if you're going to get the best out of Derek Carr, you better protect him. So that's my first concern. Cesar Ruiz, coming off an injury, foot injury for him at the end of the year. My question is not nearly as dire as the Trevor Penning question, but it's a fair question to ask. Was last year's Cesar Ruiz a glimpse and sign of what's to come? Or was it a fluke? If it's a fluke, all right, that stinks, but he'll be off the team because they didn't pick up his option. If it wasn't a fluke, great. Now the Saints will have to pay for it in the offseason next year, but excellent news because then all of a sudden, I feel good about 3 offensive linemen as opposed to just 2 with McCoy and Ramczyk. So that's my question about Ruiz. Is it a ridiculous question? Is it one that I'm kind of trembling over? Absolutely not. I actually think that Ruiz showed us who he is going to be rather than having a fluke here. Maybe that's the optimism side of me saying it, but I think that this guy really did turn a corner with better coaching around him, more experience. So that's my question after Ruiz. Was 2022 a fluke, or is 2022 who you really are? And if it's the second one, awesome. But it is a question. And now the third one. Andrus Peat. What do you want? He's always hurt. He's a year older. He is not under contract next year, so maybe that's a good thing, right? Because he's going to have to play for more money next season. But he is always injured. And what stinks about him getting hurt is he's very versatile. You can play him at left tackle. You can play him at left guard. And you can't do that if he's not on the field. And if he doesn't play, then all of a sudden, New Orleans has to play James Hurst more. And look, I like James Hurst. I actually think James Hurst is such a valuable offensive lineman to have on this team that you're kind of assuming one of these guys is not going to play, right? You're assuming whether it's Ruiz or Penning or Pete, one of them's going to get hurt, right? Thank God you have Hurst because he could just slide right in and do the job. But I sit here today, guys, like I said, about 3 weeks till training camp, a little less than. And I have concerns about 3/5 of the starting offensive line. And my other concerns on the Saints are all depth concerns. This is the only one where I'm like, dude, this is a starting concern. And that scares me because the Saints cannot afford to be one of these teams that their offensive line is just severely banged up, because the offensive line is going to be out here to protect Derek Carr. The offensive line is going to be out here, like Margaret said in the chat, to get your run game going. And you guys know how I feel about the Saints team. I think their run game, talent-wise, should be outstanding this season. Alvin, Jamal Williams, Kendrick Miller, Taysom Hill should be outstanding. But if the offensive line is not doing its job, then all of a sudden you start to have a little concern. So that is the biggest flaw on the Saints for my money. 3/5 of your offensive line are coming off injuries. That's not great. We'll see what happens, though, this fall. Now I'm going to switch gears and go towards the positive side of things. Should the Saints make a big trade? So Friday, I shared a tweet on Twitter, which obviously where else can you share a tweet? So dumb of me to say. It was a Bleacher Report hypothetical page where it was like trade scenarios to light up the NFL. And one of them was Davante Adams reunites with Derek Carr in New Orleans. And on paper, Saints roster would be filthy. The idea of Davante Adams with Chris Olave, with Rashid Shaheed, with Michael Thomas, like as a defensive coordinator, what the hell do you tell your players going into that game, right? Do you want Davante or you want Michael Thomas? Oh, you don't want either one? All right, I guess guard Chris Olave. Well, screw me at that point, right? How are you going to do that as a defense? But it would cost a lot. Davante Adams would cost minimum a day one pick because he is still one of the best, if not the best receiver in the league. He is still in the prime of his career. And if you're the Saints, you trade for a guy like that, you're doing it with the idea of like, hey, we get him. He's our missing piece. Let's go. Let's get the job done. So there is that part of you where you're like, hey, if a trade like that happened, you're mortgaging a lot. Now, it doesn't have to be Davante Adams. It could be Danielle Hunter, defensive end from the Vikings, who I've talked about before on this very show. He would give this pass rush a whole new look because I think he would give them the elite playmaker they need. You know, someone told me on I can't remember if it was YouTube or TikTok. It was a short video I did talking about Danielle Hunter. And I said, you know, Cam Jordan needs some help because Cam Jordan's no longer elite. And I didn't mean that as a knock on Cam Jordan. What I meant is this guy's about to be 34 years old, has been balling for the Saints since 2011. It's okay for him to have some assistance. It's okay. So I expect the Saints to, in a way, bolster their defensive line. And if they're going to do that, Danielle Hunter would be a really, really good option. Now, he, like Davante Adams, would cost you a bit. I don't expect him to cost you a day one pick, but a day two pick for Danielle Hunter, that seems pretty fair. Coming off another 10-plus sack season, looking for a new contract, LSU guy who has had about 4 or 5 years of double-digit sacks in his career, he might cost you a second rounder. But again, splash trade that will make the Saints significantly better on paper if you did it. And now there's the third guy, and we've mentioned him about a gazillion times. So let's mention him one more time, just for old time's sake. Hunter Renfrow. Not going to cost that much. I think he'd be more of a day 3 pick, maybe a 4th-round pick. But you know what you're getting. You're getting a technician in the slot, a guy that is going to give you another reliable target on third down, another guy that's going to work the middle of the field, a guy who has history with Derek Carr, so you don't need time for them to get on the same page. They should kind of hit the ground running. And I think with Hunter Renfrow, he's kind of that mix of you make a move to improve your roster, but you're not really killing your future. Now, that gets me to this point. A big trade, if the Saints were to make one, pushes all the chips to the center of the table. A big trade, if the Saints were to make one, makes them in that Super Bowl or now conversation. Super Bowl or bust, excuse me, because you got to do it. You got to do it. You can't make a trade for Davante Adams or Neil Hunter or Hunter Renfrow and go, now I'm playing for next year. No, you're not. Like, don't lie to people. You are going for it right now. And that's fine. The knock on that and the concern I have when you make a move of that magnitude is this. If the Saints make a blockbuster trade, hypothetically, over the next month, let's say they trade a 2nd and a 5th for Danielle Hunter, or a 1st-rounder and more for Davante Adams, you gotta hope it works. Because if it doesn't work and you don't reach your ceiling, and the Saints go, all right, DA is not the guy, let's bring in a new coach. That new coach in his first year is going to have not that much draft ammo, which means his first year is a little tainted in a way because he doesn't have the full repertoire at his disposal. The full array of picks to get a guy in the 1st round, a guy in the 2nd round, and make sure that he's getting immediate impact players for his first year. So that is the downside of making a move like this where you go all in, you got no money left behind. If you're playing poker, you feel pretty good about your hand, you're going all in. That's it. There's no money left behind, you're all in. So I think that is the concern. If this fails, what happens to the next coaching staff? Or do you ride it out another year with these guys and kind of let them pay the price of not having those picks? Like, there is a weird slope. It's a slippery slope as to getting it done. Because, like, it sounds great. Devontae Adams in the black and gold, Daniil Hunter helping out the Saints, Hunter Renfrow coming along. Either of those three, any of those three really would make me so excited, because I think they're all gamers. And I think they're all guys that if I put them in New Orleans, I know what I'm getting. I'm not having any questions about them. And because I know what I'm getting, I don't have to have as much pressure on the young guys, right? Daniil Hunter in New Orleans, less pressure on Peyton Turner, less pressure on Isaiah Foskey, and everything can kind of trickle down, right? Guys can kind of get into their roles, different roles they'll be, but they can get into it. And I think for New Orleans, you can use a player like that. But are you comfortable going all in, knowing that your head coach is a guy that has never gone 500 or better in his head coaching career? 15-38 to be exact, with 7-10 being his best mark. It's a scary, scary situation. So how do the Saints handle it? And what do you do? It's a very, very fair question. And the Saints are going to have to figure it out. Because I think this roster is good enough to compete. I think this roster can get the job done. And I'll talk about that in a minute when I talk about the NFC. But I got questions about the coach. And it's not just him, right? Like, Pete Carmichael's got to be better. The defense obviously has to be better. Special teams has to be better, right? Will Lutz and Blake Gillikin did not play well last year. So we'll see what happens, guys. But that is the fun part about if you make a big trade. You are all in. It is Super Bowl or bust. The downside, if it ends up in the bust part, what the hell? Where do you go next, right? So that's the question I have. Now, before I get into whether or not I think the Saints can realistically win the NFC, I want to talk about Chris Smith of Ladder and Bloom and what you guys can do about your real estate. Chris Smith is one of the top realtors in New Orleans. And if you want a free marketing valuation of your property, if you want to book a property tour, or just talk real estate in general, you can give him a call at 504-231-2004. That is Chris Smith of Ladder and Bloom. So let's get into the final topic here on this July 10th show of the Straight Up Saints podcast. Can the Saints win the NFC? You did not hear me say it wrong. You did not hear me go into La La Land, although I do freaking love that movie. Are the Saints capable of winning the NFC? Can they win the NFC? This was first brought up last week by Jason McIntyre, filling in for Colin Cowherd on the herd. He did his 5 bold predictions for the 2023 season. And his bold prediction, or maybe his boldest, was the Saints win the NFC. Not the Niners, not the Seahawks, not the Eagles, not the Cowboys, not the Vikings or the Packers or the Bears or the Lions, the Rams, the New Orleans Saints. That's what we picked to win the NFC. And his rationale behind it was this. Saints have a very good roster, which they do. Good wide receivers, good starting defensive players, a lot of running backs that can make plays now. A improved quarterback room, right? Your starter became the backup. You brought in Derek Carr. Okay? You have a defensive-minded coach who will get the best out of his defense. I have no doubts about that with DA. And like I said, schedule-wise, third place schedule, NFC South, AFC South, which is a Titans, Colts, Texans, Jaguars mix-up where it's not that great. So he loved the roster. He loved the schedule. And he said, Saints, winning the NFC, they're going to take advantage of that. Well, I understand the rationale, and I think there is a lot of logic to making a bold prediction of that magnitude. Like, that's what a bold prediction should be. A bold prediction shouldn't be something that makes you look so freaking stupid no one wants to talk sports with you. A bold prediction should be something that no one else is going to have, but there's logic to it. And I sit here today and I say this about for the, 10th time this offseason. The Saints are good enough, talent-wise. They are good enough to get the job done. You don't have to like Derek Carr. You don't have to like this defense. You don't have to like this offensive skill player group, but they're good enough to get the job done. The question is coaching. But I look at this Saints team. And if I look around the NFC, there are teams with more question marks than them. The Cardinals, the Rams, the Bucks, the Commanders, the Bears, the Packers. Those are, first off, that's 6 teams off the rip, I think have more questions than them. Then there are teams that are in the Saints ballpark, right? Falcons, Panthers. I'll go with the Vikings. I'll even go with the Lions. I'll go with the Giants. There's another 5 teams right there that I'm like, I don't know. And that leads me to this. The Seahawks, the Niners, the Eagles, and the Cowboys are the only 4 teams that I feel okay saying I think they're better than the Saints today. Definitively better than the Saints today. Outside of that, I don't think I can say that about anyone else. In honesty, in complete honesty, how I feel, truly, I can't say it about any other team. And even those teams, there are questions, right? Niners have had injury concerns in the past. Seahawks, are you getting the same year out of Geno Smith? Cowboys, what's going to go on now that Mike McCarthy's calling plays offensively? Eagles, I mean, it looks perfect. Everything looks perfect to them right now. But there's some weird shit that goes on with teams that make the Super Bowl and lose. They get cursed like there's no tomorrow. And I'm just curious. Just curious to see how that goes, how they play now coming off that appearance. If they keep it rolling, if the curse gets to them, do they have a little hangover? It's a fair question. So I look around the NFC. The Saints can absolutely win the NFC. And you guys are going to look at me like I have 5 heads, but I don't. I just got one big one. And I think that they can do it. Will they do it? I'm going to say no, but I think they can. Now, the question as to why I don't think they can and what concerns me is all on the coach. DA is a guy that has to prove it. But this is where DA's got a little bit of history, or I'd say recent experiences, helping his case out. Did anyone think Nick Sirianni was a great coach before last season? Did you? I know I didn't. I actually had concerns about Nick Sirianni. I thought the Eagles roster was good. I just didn't know if he was a good coach. And he looked damn good this year. And the Eagles made the Super Bowl. And honestly, the Eagles should have won the Super Bowl. A slip up here, a slip up there, all of a sudden you lose. But for the majority of that Super Bowl, they were the better team. And that was with a team that I knew I liked the roster, but I didn't know if I liked the coach. And I'm not expecting the Saints to win the Super Bowl. I'm not expecting the Saints to win the NFC. All I'm telling you today, though, is when you look around the picture of the NFC, there is no Chiefs. There are no Bengals. There are no Bills where you look around and you go, well, I know they're going to be 1, 2, and 3 for sure. And everyone else got to settle for 4th. No, it's like, are the Eagles going to not have a hangover? Okay, put them at 1. Are the Niners going to be healthy? Okay, if they are, put them at 2. But I have all these stipulations in the NFC. You know? All these stipulations. And I don't know if the Saints will take advantage or if it will ultimately backfire. But make no mistake about it, guys. This is a very winnable conference. And it is one that if the Saints can just do their freaking job, which is take care of the division, win the games at home, win the games you're supposed to, you're going to have a shot to compete. And that's all you ask for. All you ask for. So that's how I view it. Now, before I finish it up, guys, because as you can see, I do actually think they can win the NFC. Now, I don't think they will. I just think they can. There's a difference. I'll just bring up any comments, questions, predictions, whatever that you guys have in the chat, and then I'll get you guys going on your Monday. Margaret says, I'm worried about Carmichael. Hated this play calling last year. Yeah, I thought a couple of things about Carmichael. Didn't always establish the run. Ran too many times on 2nd and 10. That drove me nuts. Didn't really go for it on 4th down, but I think that's more of a head coach thing than it is an offensive coordinator thing. Some games they didn't know how to use Taysom Hill. And some games, the offense looks so stagnant. I'm thinking the Ravens Monday night. I'm thinking the Niners when they were held scoreless. He's got to be better. No doubt about it. I'm glad you brought that up. And I think he will be better. And obviously a little hoot at and a good morning everyone in the chat over here, like Trav504. Margaret also adds, I think the Lions are the one to watch. This is where I'm at with the Lions. I think the Lions are in a similar situation with the Saints. Really like the talent. Really like the schedule. Is the coach going to get it done? And I love Dan Campbell. But Dan Campbell needs to make the playoffs this year. Because if Dan Campbell doesn't, then all of a sudden you're 3 years into the Dan Campbell era with no playoff appearance. And your favorite thing you can say about him is he's great with the media and he has really good sound bites. And I love that about Dan Campbell. I think Dan Campbell is highly quotable. He's got that infectious personality that you just want to play for that guy. Like, I can understand why anyone on the Lions would want to run through a wall for Dan Campbell. He seems like a genuine, great guy to lead a team. But just like we say DA's got to make the playoffs, he's got to make the playoffs. And Detroit is they're one of those teams where it's like you got to see it to believe it. And I just worry, is it too much hype for them? Because the one thing we can say about the Saints is the Saints don't get any hype from anyone. Like the Jason McIntyre thing was an anomaly. Usually people are poo-pooing on the Saints and talking about how they spend their money unwisely. They refuse to rebuild. They're delusional. They don't know what to do with the cap. All this nonsense. The Lions are getting a lot of love, and I have questions about how they handle it. That's all I say. But I agree with you, Margaret. The talent is there. They very well could compete in the NFC. So we just got to see what happens. Keeping it real with Who Dat Sports Podcast says, I believe the Saints still need to add competition at linebacker and defensive line, interior, and edge. I agree wholeheartedly with you. I think they are a linebacker injury away of having a huge hole in the defense. I think the defensive line isn't as pressing from a depth perspective because I do think Carl Granderson will step up. You got to hope Peyton Turner comes through. Isaiah Foskey could step up. Tano Passanio, you brought him back. He should be good. So I think depth-wise they're fine, but I agree with you. Get another defensive lineman in the building. Maybe you get a Yanni, you can bring him in. Free agent with 9.5 sacks last year with the Colts. Maybe you go out and get to Neil Hunter, whoever it may be. But yeah, I agree with you. Go get more depth in. I'm all for them adding defense because Dennis Allen, I know, will get the job done with that defense. What's going on with the offense is probably the bigger question, but you add more firepower to Dennis Allen's defense. Yeah, I feel good about that. Little good morning for everyone in here. Margaret says, I feel Campbell has the passion that DA lacks. 1,000%. There is no doubt about that. Like I said, when DA speaks, it feels like he's kind of just doing a seminar. When Campbell speaks, it sounds like he's getting his troops ready for war. And there's a big difference there. And I promise you, it does matter because the Lions went into a Sunday night game with the Packers that ended up being meaningless because their playoff chances got killed 2 hours before kickoff. And they played that game like their playoff lives were on the line. Dennis Allen's team, which only had, I believe, what was it? 7 wins going into the final week of the season. You would like to see them play a little hard because, hey, I don't know if I'm keeping my job, whatever. Dud, absolute dud against the Panthers. So there's two different type of coaches in the world. Unfortunately for the Saints, they have the one that is not just oozing with passion, you know? With a more healthy offense, do you think Carmichael and his play calling get better or the fact that he has the horses to cut loose? Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'll say this about Pete Carmichael. I think that one issue about the Saints last year, they did not have a lot of weapons at his disposal. They did not because Michael Thomas got hurt early. They were not ready to utilize Shaheed until, end of November, early December? So that was a concern. With Jawan, he was awesome. But when was he going to, you didn't know when he was going to have that explosion yet. Taysom Hill, I blame that on Carmichael wholeheartedly. You got to know when to use him. You got to know what fits him best. So I think part of it was on Pete. Part of it was on the lack of weapons. But now it's no excuse, man. No excuse. You have Michael Thomas back. You added A.T. Perry. You added a Brian Edwards. Olave and Shaheed have gotten better. You added a Foster Moreau. You added Jamal Williams. You brought in Kendre Miller. So now, if the passing game's not working, I think that you have the run game to fall back on. And I thought there were games last year where the Saints ran the ball extremely well. I'd like to see them get back to that on a consistent basis. But also, Derek Carr is going to run the offense at the line of scrimmage, the way Pete Carmichael wants his offense to be run. So I think that is something that is going to be really beneficial to the Saints and really beneficial to Pete Carmichael. I fully expect that. So I do think he will be better. How much better is the question, but I don't think he'll be as bad as last year. I really don't. Margaret says, when is the court date for Kamara? I believe it is July 31st, so a couple days after the start of training camp. So he's probably going to miss some time. Keeping it real, Who Dat Sports Podcast says, I would like to extend you an invitation to join us. Join us. My Bet Great Show. I would love to come on. Let me know when. I will be going on vacation later this week, so I'll be out for just a week. Wanted to squeeze in a vacation before training camp, but absolutely, let me know. I'd love to chop it up with you. And I appreciate you, as always, leaving comments in the chat. I really do. But yeah, anytime anyone wants to chat Saints, whether it is Twitter, whether it is on a show, let me know. I'm always game for that, and I definitely would love nothing more than to accept that invitation. But anyway, guys, that is going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. There won't be one next Monday because I'll still be away. I come back on the 19th. So I will be active on Twitter. If anything breaks, I'll make sure to have short videos, even though I'll be on vacation. So fingers crossed there are no breaking news for the Saints. But I'll be active nonetheless just to keep it with you guys. I appreciate you guys sending your kind thoughts. I hope you have an excellent Monday. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week and get ready because we are getting really, really close to training camp. And when that happens, we'll be right here to cover it on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. Have a great Monday, everyone.